I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. Beginning our session, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I collect by listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. His Holiness recommends the following prayers when we're studying Shantideva's guide. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble. Like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the winds and waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. And the Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus I did hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on a mass of Vultures Mountain in Rajgir, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. And at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding these five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odour, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no mind element and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharatvattiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. And the praise to Manjushri, which has a very special relationship with Shantideva's text. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the whole sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatanadi, Om Rapatanadi, Om Rapatanadi, Om Rapatanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I might gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Outer and inner mandalas, and the mandala for requesting teachings. Sashi Poki Chushing Me Tok Tramri Rabling Nidegen Padi Sangye Jingdu Mite Ua Kidro Kunam Dag Jingla Shopashok Dagi Chadang Mong Sum Kepe Yulranyen Basum Ludang Long Choche Pang Pa Me Pa Bugi Leje Ne Du Sum Rang Sa Drol Wa Jin Gi sun lama dampa kenam ki chuku kala ken se chuzin trik Jita sampe duje zinma lavzab kechoki chapawab tuso. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. So I'm going to begin with a quotation from Shantideva's training anthology, and this particular sutra extract comes from the noble teaching of Akayamati Sutra, which says, "A bodhisattva alone, without a second, without a companion, puts on the armor for highest, genuine, full awakening. By undertaking the power of perseverance and through higher intention, she does not make others do things, but takes on tasks herself through the power of her own strength. Wearing this solid armor in this way, she thinks, whatever needs to be done for all sentient beings, I will do it. Whatever all the noble ones and all the bodhisattvas who are newly practicing the way will not get done, I will get done. I do not have generosity as a companion. I am now a companion of generosity. I do not have moral discipline, patient endurance, perseverance, meditative discipline, and wisdom as companions. I am now a companion of moral discipline, patient endurance, meditative stability, and wisdom. I should not be served by the perfections, rather, I should serve the perfections. The same applies to the ways of bringing people together and also to all wholesome actions, and so on up to alone without a second, without a companion. I should sit on the great adamantine disc, and after vanquishing Mara with his vehicle and all his power, with wisdom coming together in a single moment of mind, I should awaken to the highest, genuine, full enlightenment." So, this is exactly the kind of resolve we are making as we're studying Shantideva's text. We determine to achieve highest enlightenment by serving the six perfections, and by relying on our own strength, we think whatever needs to be done for all sentient beings, I will do it. We make this resolve alone, by ourselves, without wasting a single second and without a companion, in the sense that we are not dependent upon the support of others to preserve or facilitate our armor-like determination. This is the sign of the unshakable strength of our resolve. This is why perseverance is likened to an armour. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, after quoting the following verse from Shantideva, chapter 8, verse 120, whoever wishes to quickly afford a protection to both himself and other beings should practice that holy secret, the exchanging of self for others. And Rinpoche then elaborates, this is not just words, but that is the big thing that we really have to pay attention to. Now, if you want to guide yourself and others, exchange oneself and others, let go of I and cherish others from where all the happiness comes, from beginningless rebirths, now, in the future, liberation from samsara, enlightenment, peerless happiness. All the qualities, all the realizations of the path, all the qualities of Buddhas, all the qualities of Bodhisattvas, the numberless qualities of a Buddha's body, speech, and mind, you receive from others. So cherish them, cherish. So this is the inexhaustible secret of our armor-like determination. And why would we need companions when we are the companions of all the numberless sentient beings whom we cherish as more dear than ourselves? Such is the source from whence all happiness comes. So, moving forward and much more rapidly, I shall add again Gyaltsabje's headings for the individual verses or sets of verses going forward. So the next heading is confessing heavy negativity created with regard to special objects. Verse 20. Whatever harmful acts of body, speech, and mind I've done in a disturbed state of mind, towards the three jewels of refuge, towards the three, to my parents, my spiritual masters, and others. The whatever indicates that we're including each and every, and therefore all, our harmful acts in relation to special objects. These objects are specifically delineated. They are the karmically potent objects of which we have already spoken in previous sessions. Stealing from the Dharma by robbing an offering altar or maliciously destroying Dharma texts would be cases in point, as would murdering one's parents. Pabonka refers to these as great sins and says that even inadvertently joking about karmically potent beings such as our parents or insulting them under our breath will cause us to disappear into the lower realms. Kunsang Pelden refers to the great adept called Kaya Gangpa, quote, who was tormented by the powerful sensation of his body being pierced by the white letter R. The fully ripened result, he said, of keeping the money a benefactor had given him to recite the Prajnaparamitra Sutra in 8,000 stanzas. Kunsang Pelden adds, it is said that stealing the property of the Sangha, wherever it may be, and especially the provisions directly donated to it, constitutes a very grave fault. This is why it is said, quote, the Sangha's property is like diamonds. The Sangha's property is like poison. So again, you can see a relationship between the weight of the karma incurred and the weight, if you like, of the virtue of the object. And all such non-virtuous actions performed in relation to such very powerful objects, such as the triple gem, or one's parents, or one's guru, are to be included here in Shantideva's verse. Shantideva's mention of the mental source of all our harmful action being one arising from a disturbed state is also deliberately broad as to capture all varieties of deluded, afflictive motivations conceivably responsible for triggering such heavy karmic actions. The net, re the delusions, is intentionally cast very wide, in other words. As we move from one verse to the next, as Drag Pagelsson signals, we are to consider each as a moment in the flow of our own personal voice, addressing the refuge objects in direct confessional mode. Hence here, in relation to our current verse, we're invited to think along these lines. Whatever harmful acts of body, speech, and mind one having mistakes have done by means of their causes, the afflictions that are the three poisons, towards the three jewels who are of great power by way of their excellent qualities, my parents who are of great kindness, my spiritual masters who are the field of merit, and others, I confess all these mistakes, such as the actions of immediate retribution, endangering the bodies of my spiritual masters, not heeding their advice, and disturbing their minds. I'm just referring to my text for a moment. So the verse is, whatever harmful acts of body, speech, and mind I have done in a disturbed mental state, towards the three jewels of refuge, my parents, my spiritual masters, and others. The next heading is confessing with regret, generated by contemplating the undesired results of non-virtue. Referring to verse 31. And all the grave wrongs done by me, so thoroughly evil and polluted by an abundance of faults, I openly declare to the guides of the world. Through his heading, Gyaltsabje is indicating that the power of regret is already entailed in our open declaration of grave wrongs we have performed. This becomes clearer when we consider that the literal translation of the Tibetan term used in the commentary is the power of repudiation. Therefore, as Geshe Dogu explains in a later discourse, I quote, the way to develop that opponent power of thorough repudiation is to contemplate the consequences of the negativity that one has engaged in the past. When one really thinks about the consequences in detail, great fear naturally arises. And then the power of thorough repudiation will be generated in one's mind. I do think there's a value in this word repudiation over regret, because regret sort of stops when the word does. But repudiation sort of suggests pushing away of something that was formerly accepted or acceptable. And so actually turning it away, and that action of turning, if you like, is still in play. It's a dynamic word. It's not just regret, I regret. It's repudiating. This is the force of the power. It's a pushing away of the non-virtue so that it can't return. So returning to our current verse, Geshe-Doga says, here, one contemplates the undesirable results of non-virtue, where one thinks about the ripened results of each specific non-virtue, as well as other types of result of each of the negative karmas we have created. When one contemplates the prospect of having to experience these results, then a strong sense of regret and wishing to confess these negativities will arise quite spontaneously. End of quote. So again, the confession, as we were explaining in the last session, is generally framed, but now extends from the special objects just mentioned in the last verse to include all other grave wrongs I have committed. So putting these two sets of grave wrongs together, I, who am so thoroughly evil and polluted by an abundance of thoughts, openly declare them to the guides of the world. Geshe-Doga indicates that if we meditate in this manner, as I've just quoted, then a sense of restraint will naturally follow. The next heading is meditating on regret by fearing death with negativity and going for refuge. Verse 32. May I well perish before all my evils are being purified, but I may well perish before all my evils are purified. So please protect me in such a way as will swiftly and surely free me from them. And the next verse, 33, the untrustworthy Lord of Death waits not for things to be done or undone. Whether I am sick or healthy, this fleeting life is unstable. The meticulous care that Shantideva is taking of us here is apparent because, yes, given the fragility of our current life and the causes of death being so many, it is almost certain that we will die before we have had a time to regret and take steps to purify all our evils. Thus, we are dwelling in a state of great peril. Day by day, we're in a state of great peril. This is because without having engaged in purification, we will be at the mercy of the ripening results of negativities that have the capacity to throw us into the lower realms. This is made clear by Gyaltsab Sabje's commentary. He says, if I do not confess my negativities immediately, then I will be killed prematurely by the Lord of Death while possessing unpurified negativity and go to the lower realms. Therefore, I petition you to rescue me with all means, to quickly free me from all the negativity. Therefore, this verse is petitioning the refuge objects to please protect me in such a way as will swiftly and surely free me from those negativities before I unexpectedly, always unexpectedly die. This is actually true even for those facing a terminal illness. Even then, for them, the actual moment of death is unexpected and even shocking. Thus, Gyaltsabje's advice is to purify quickly. Why quickly? Because everybody, whether currently sick or not, whether the life force is finished or not, dies adventitiously, meaning through causes and conditions, circumstances that suddenly eventuate, completely unexpected. And therefore, it is uncertain whether today is the day we just happen to die. I had a friend who had a friend, it's one of those stories, who he was sort of a late middle-aged gentleman who had looked very much forward to a holiday in Bali, sort of a favourite holiday destination for Australians and other people as well, but Australians in particular because of its proximity. And this particular gentleman had saved up. He had talked about his holiday over and over and over with glee and delight to all his friends. And he eventually got on the plane and arrived in Denpasar, went through customs, went to the place where he was dwelling, staying, went outside to admire the garden, and was killed by a branch of a giant tree that fell on his head. This is a true story. I had another friend who was planning to do her 100,000 Bodhisattva mantras as part of her Nundro retreat. But before she got around to it, she stepped out of bed one morning and fell dead on the carpet next to her bed from a massive heart attack. But there would have to say there would still be a purificatory benefit in her very intent to do the purification practice. Lama Zopa Rinpoche tells the following story. Quote, in a previous course in Nepal, I mentioned the story of an Englishman who came to Nepal to make some movies in the mountains of Solo Khumbu. One night he was showing his films to a cinema audience in England. The audience was watching the film, but after some time, the screen went blank, and it looked as if the film was burning in the machine. When someone went back to check what had happened, they found the man dead in his chair beside the projector. Before the film started, there didn't seem to be anything wrong, but while he was showing the film, he suddenly died. So Gyaltsabje points out that verses 33, together with verses 34 and 35, require us to meditate, this is his next heading, meditate on regret by considering elaborately the way one meaninglessly generated negativity. This is to be done within the framework of the death and impermanence meditation, because if we recognize that we have created negativity on behalf of friends, enemies, and strangers, and possessions, friend, enemy, and possessions, not knowing that they are unreliable. I'll read that again. That this is done from within the framework of the death and impermanence meditation is because we recognize that we have created negativity on behalf of friends, body, and possessions, not knowing that they are unreliable. They are unreliable in that no samsaric objects are certain to bring us stable happiness due to being afflicted by nature, subject to impermanence, flooded by pervasive suffering, etc. These aspects of unreliability are presented in the Lam Rim in the second scope, practices pertaining to the middle scope practitioner, wherein the emphasis is on escaping cyclic existence altogether. The first of the 6 types of suffering pertaining to psychic existence in general is named as the fault of uncertainty. Tsongkhapa quotes Nagarjuna's friendly letter. For those in cyclic existence, there are no certainties, because fathers become sons, mothers become wives, enemies become friends, and the converse happens as well. The reference to elaborately, I'm just referring to the heading again, meditate on regret by considering elaborately the way one meaninglessly generated negativity. The reference to negativity alerts us to our task. We are to engage in a pursuit of via an analytical meditation involving scanning through our relationships, our sorted attempts to privilege our own body and possessions over all others. In this way, we are able to appreciate the intent of verses 34 and 35. I'll read those out. Leaving all, I must depart alone. But through having not understood this, I committed various kinds of evil for the sake of my friends and foes. My foes will become nothing. My friends will become nothing. I too will become nothing. Likewise, all will become nothing. Geshe Doga indicates that verse 34 is quite easy to understand because it revolves around the fact that I will die alone and thus leave my friends and foes totally behind. But any negative karmas I've accumulated in regards to them through anger, hatred, and attachment, etc., will not be similarly abandoned or left behind. Remember last week's detailed account of karmic seeds on our mind stream. When the conditions are assembled, they will ripen with unfortunate consequences, in the case of non-virtual seeds. Therefore, it is surely foolish to have generated negative karmas in this counterproductive way. So obviously, counterproductive because we thought that we were producing the causes of happiness, and that's why we perform those non-virtuous actions. So obviously it is sensible to now sincerely develop strong regret and seek to purify them, at least half of them, Geshe Doga says. Verse 35, and I'll read it again. My foes will become nothing, my friends will become nothing, I too will become nothing, likewise all will become nothing. Has a ghastly or even ghostly refrain. It is like the tolling of a giant bell announcing we are literally finished. Gyaltsab glosses, even if all these things must perish, become nothing, nonetheless, the frightening fruitional result of the negativity that we have created, for their sake, still remains before us. It cannot be shared by others. Hence, what use are obstructive friends? So you'll relate this reference to the frightening fruitional result of the negativity to the discussion in the last session to do with the continuity being provided by the seeds. As Geshe Doga says, the creator of that negativity will definitely perish and have to experience the consequences of the negativity they have created. That is the crucial point that one really needs to reflect upon. We might sort of add here that it revolves a certain kind of abstraction in the form of a withdrawal from the incredible attachment we have to the world of affairs happening around us, full of friends and foes and ambitions and careers and failures, and all of it spins around. And so to begin to see that there is an underlying problem that is actually the problem takes quite a lot of careful work. We have to extract ourselves from the scene that we're currently immersed in order to begin to glimpse a larger framework of which will enable a much deeper understanding of our predicament. It will also enable us, if you like, to subtract the excessive investment we have in the so-called certainties of samsara that are in fact uncertain and unreliable. We can decathect them, if we want to use a psychological term. We suck the energy out of them so they can't function with the same libidinal attractive force anymore. They're there, but they're not there they're not compelling us anymore to get hooked in. We're able to quietly sit and observe and then restructure and realign ourselves accordingly. So this, of course, is one of the very, very precious roles of meditation, and in particular, in this case, analytical meditation. So consequently, we should contemplate this topic again and again according to the way it is being taught and generate regret done for the sake of these others. You can see here how Gyaltsabje is also directly pointing us towards the death and impermanent meditations found in their classic form in the Lam Rim. This time, in the major section following the presentation of the precious human rebirth. This sequence of the death and impermanence meditation following the precious human rebirth presentation is significant because it is a failure to recognize death and impermanence that cajoles us into a dullness or an apathy or a kind of complacency whereby we squander our precious human rebirth. It's one thing to recognize our precious human rebirth, and there are meditations for doing that. But if we then just sort of rest on that, we're going to come a cropper when we face death and impermanence. It's going to shake us to the very foundations. We haven't prepared for it. And so therefore, we're not actually seizing the essence of our precious human rebirth if we divorce it from a deep understanding of death and impermanence. As Nagarjuna says in his friendly letter, one who is born as a human and then becomes involved in wrongdoings is even more foolish than one who fills a golden vessel adorned with jewels, with vomit. Creating all kinds of non-virtues in relation to my friends and foes is to produce this vomit, and all is predicated on the mistaken belief that my friends are always and always already really my friends, and my enemies are always and already really my enemies, and my strangers, well, I don't even bother to think seriously about them, do I? So you can see here that there are a whole series of meditations that are really, really valuable to perform. And so friend, enemy, and stranger meditation is also very precious here, because we understand that in the midst of all these variable permutations and combinations, each one of those persons cycling within all these three categories, friend, enemy, and stranger, at the mix and want of our egotistical projections is in fact a suffering sentient being equally worthy of care and love and protection as we are. So it's really helpful to think that we're an enemy in someone's meditation, a friend in someone else's meditation, and a stranger in someone else's meditation. We know from our side we matter, we count, we hurt when we're in pain. So does everyone else who's in our stranger category, our friend category, our enemy category. So this is a way of leveling the field in order to begin to generate an aspirational bodhicitta that's going to care for each and every one of those beings without partiality. So it's another form of impermanence, because we recognize that those categories are constantly shifting. So we're trying to find a more stable ground for generating love and compassion towards those beings. The next verse, 36, is placed under the heading example for how they become a mere object of memory. And the verse reads, just like a dream experience, whatever things I enjoy will become a memory. Whatever has passed will not be seen again. The example of a dream is a classical and a very profound one. Even the present moments of the words that I'm uttering is perishing and becoming a past moment, even as I speak. Even a single word is perishing, and even the part of a single word is perishing. So if we really take the reality of subtle impermanence to heart, we'll no longer have the same force of desirous attraction, etc., to perishable phenomenon, because they are like water slipping through our fingers. Even though they appear as permanent and solid, they have no more substance, no more fixity or durability than the illusions playing or frolicking in the space of a dream. A whole lifetime at the time of death appears like a momentary dream experience, and now it is over. In the garland of birth stories, we find precisely this image. Alas, O worldly beings obscured by suffering, there is no pleasure, for you will not remain long. Even the glory of this full moon festival will become a mere memory. Gungtang Rinpoche says, human life is impermanent, a short bout of sleep, crowded with meaningless dreams, some happy, some sad. When you suddenly awake to life in the lower realms, what will you do? So our moments of pleasure are to be considered dreamlike in the same way. Soon they will be mere faded memories. Yet, what karmic misdeeds we have accumulated in a bid to prolong and maintain them. Geshe Sopa presents this same analogy within the context of the classical mindfulness of death meditation. He says, when you wake up from a sweet dream, the pleasures of that dream are mere memories. In the same way, all the joys of this life will become mere memories at the time of death. None of them will actually be there with you. You go to your future life alone. Your relatives, friends, wealth, and reputation will not accompany you to your next life. You go by yourself. Death will definitely come, yet there is nothing that can change that. Because this life is only temporary, all activities that are directed only towards living are ill-conceived. Geshe Sopa continues, you have a choice about how you're going to utilize the opportunity presented in this precious life. You can see this life as a border, B-O-R-E-D-E-R. You stand at the edge. From here, you can pull yourself up or you can let yourself go down. It all depends on what you do in this life. But this life will soon finish. When the end comes, you'll need something really reliable, really helpful. What is that thing? It is practicing the Dharma. Therefore, you should think, why am I enjoying the deceitful, temporary pleasures of this life? Instead of wasting time this way, I should be practicing the Dharma. While I have this precious life, I must use it for the benefit of the future. You should make a firm decision to practice the Dharma. End of quote. So reflecting in this pungent manner is how we bring realizations into effect, rather than just operating at some vague level of conceptual acknowledgement. So in our current purification context, the Dharma to be practiced is purification now. The next verse falls under the following heading: regretting having generated negativity for them, although seeing now directly their unreliability. You can see here how Shantideva is moving with incredible finesse through the various rationalized positions that we manufacture ourselves to prevent us from actually engaging in virtue and practicing the Dharma. So we still manage, in other words, to produce negativity in relation to these objects, even when we recognize that they're unreliable. That's how insidious and perverse our compulsive, afflicted approaches to our lives and the objects in our lives are. So the verse that's been referred to here is 37. Even within this brief life, many friends and foes have passed, but whatever unbearable evil I committed for them remains ahead of me. Gyaltsab Sabje asks us to contemplate like this again and again. The point is, from a karmic perspective, though I've performed many negative actions for their purpose, some very elaborate, and which put me even at legal risk, they'll not be hanging around to reap or share the consequences. Karmically speaking, these are to be experienced by myself alone. So we know this from our friends, nature of friendship. They often sort of entice us into activities which aren't in our own best interests. And we do go along with it. But when it comes to the crunch of our own death, we're the one who's carrying the burden of the actions that we performed at that time. Our friends are not to be seen for the dust. We go alone. So at that point, obviously, it's too late to wake up to ourselves because we've already performed whatever negative deeds we had already engaged in relation to our friends and so forth. I think this reference to friends to Shantideva is very clearly talking about our social world and our social relationships, and indeed our intimate social relationships, and helping us navigate those relationships in a more what's the word for it? I'm not going to use the word holistic, but a more beneficial way, truly, genuinely beneficial way, productive way. And it is possible. We're not being asked to give up our friends, but we're being asked to relate in an appropriate manner that's going to be productive for the happiness of both our friends and for ourselves. And that takes some very, very particular Dharma work. So getting caught up in this way is the case irrespective of whether they are our friends or our enemies. Even if they wish they could no longer help me or harm me. I'm traveling to the next life utterly on my own, just as I came into it. In the essence of a human life, words of advice for a lay practitioner, Lama Tsongkhapa says, to conclude, you are born alone, die alone. Friends and relations are therefore unreliable. Dharma alone is the supreme reliance. So this is the condensation exactly, isn't it, of the topic that we're currently investigating. Mention of remains ahead of me is ominous, as it indicates that those many friends and foes have passed, but the negative, heavy negative karmic legacy of accumulation in relation to them remains ahead of me, meaning it will ripen in my future rebirths in unhappy and even disastrous ways. Gelt Subje adds in his commentary, if it cannot be shared by others, then what use are obstructing friends? The it here, he says, it cannot be shared. The it here refers to the frightening fruitional result of the negativity that we've created for their sake. I think when he says obstructing friends, he's not suggesting that friends are implicitly or by nature obstructing. He's talking about what happens when we have an inappropriate relationship with our friends. I think a good example of that, of course, is the mind of desire. If we structure our friendships on the basis of a kind of rabid attachment, then the purpose of our friend in the eyes or to the eyes of that attachment is to satisfy us. That is their role, their duty. The moment our friend, in whatever way, fails to provide that succor through the narrow lens of our egotistical attachment, forces us to generate a very powerful afflicted mind, such as anger, resentment, jealousy, and so forth, rejection, all the things that go on in sort of broken and damaged relationships. So that isn't a problem to do with one person and another. It's got to do with the nature of the attachment, because attachment won't broach difference that doesn't fit into its scenario. I watched one of those ridiculous dating programs on television, and when they try to make matches on television live, and on this occasion, one young chap had been sort of teamed up with a very attractive young woman who had amazing long hair, sort of crinkled and sort of rolling down her shoulders. And things seem to be go swimmingly in the first couple of programs. And then in the next program, suddenly we discovered that they had a falling out and were going to go their separate ways. And he was asked on live telly why that was the case. And he said that she had cut her hair. She had cut it into a tight bob. And as a consequence, he didn't feel attracted to her anymore and couldn't consider having a relationship. Now, that's laughable, isn't it? But it's actually the structural epitome of what we're doing all the time when we have a mind of desire that's dominating the way we forge our affairs. So if it's not the hair, it's something else. It doesn't really matter. It's just a sort of transitional object, really, from that point of view, isn't it? The next heading is regretting having generated negativity by not realizing the uncertainty of the time of one's death. Verse 38, thereby, through not having realized that I will suddenly vanish, I committed so much evil out of ignorance, lust, and hate. The underlying thought here is that we commit so much evil at the bequest of these three poisonous minds, ignorance, lust, and hate, precisely because we cling to our own permanence, which is no more than a projected hallucination, a reified reality that exceeds the actual ontological status of causally arisen things, which by nature are perishable. When I say ontological status there, we take the permanence of the object to be inhering in the quality of the object itself. So even though it's been reified through a mental projection and transposed onto that impermanent object, the mind grasping at things as permanent, impermanent things as permanent, drops out the role of our own projective mind and actually reads the object as permanent in and of itself, where it appears to be. And on that basis, we enter into a whole world of problems. Therefore, we conjure or conceptually elaborate the fake appearance of permanent things existing from their own side, when in reality, they are impermanent and empty of self-existence from their own side. In fact, they exist in the exact opposite way of how they're being currently apprehended and grasped. But, and this is less obvious, we also cling to persons and things as having an existence from their own side. You recall from the last presentation that one of the cognitive impacts of the latencies of the afflictions, and we're referring specifically here to the latencies of self-grasping ignorance, is that they give rise to the appearance and perception of inherent existence. Due to not recognizing this appearance as false, through the force of unchallenged habit, we adhere to that appearance as real. In other words, we take their appearance as inherently existent to be their actual mode of existence. But in reality, this appearance is an hallucination arising from our own mind. So this disjunct between reality and appearance is a massive problem with all kinds of escalating implications. Why? Because innate self-grasping ignorance must be understood as constituting the very basis of the generation of our afflictions, which are to be understood as happening or unfolding in evolutionary phases. This evolutionary process involves a further major problem referred to in Buddhist terminology as inappropriate attention. Inappropriate attention is defined as a distorted attention that exaggerates the attractiveness of a polluted object, in the case of desire, for example, and wishes for and takes a strong interest in it. This process of exaggeration is a serious problem, as it means that what we compulsively grasp at is not the mere object itself, but a grotesquely blown up and deformed version of it. And it's this that becomes the source of the arising of our afflictions. The polluted object in the definition refers to an object, any object indeed, under the influence of ignorance. So to make this clearer, let's take the example of a conventionally existent I. The reason, what happens when the ontological status of this mere I is overblown, exaggerated, so that it becomes the basis for a series of distorted, disturbing effects? So let's describe the evolution. Through ignorance, we superimpose an intrinsic findability onto this mere I, which we then grasp at as existing in this way. And so the projected inherent aspect is superimposed onto the mere I, which totally lacks inherent existence from its own side. And they sort of merge together, at least from the perspective of our ignorant awareness, so that we can't distinguish the mode of the existence of the thing that does exist from the mode of existence of the thing that we have purported to exist through the projection of our ignorant projection. So this grasping takes the form of an identification with that conceived I that is superimposed and mixed with the conventional I as the real I. And so the mixture becomes for us the real I. This is what an I really is. Upon this basis, you can see here that we're taking steps. Upon this basis, we then discriminate between an inherently existent I, which we've established erroneously, but nonetheless, we've taken it to be real, and an inherently existent other. This is really, really profound to investigate. In dependence on grasping inappropriately to this one, I then have a basis to grasp inappropriately to everything else as a not this one. So you can see here how the whole universe with us in it is being structured according to this fundamental misreading of the way in which I exist. So in dependence on what's happened so far, I generate attachment to this I, and a craving for the happiness of this I arises. So we have strong afflictions, delusions now arising. Since the I's happiness cannot arise without dependence on one's property, craving for that property, mine, arises. This would include our possessions, including our body. So becoming obscured by seeing the qualities, the exaggerated qualities in these things, Seeing pleasant qualities, we desire them. Seeing and we grasp their attainment as mine, as a source of happiness. Seeing unpleasant qualities in them, again in relation to my craving to fulfill my I spurn them and seek to be separated from them because I can see them as a source of unhappiness. And through the afflictions thus produced, craving, anger, jealousy, pride, etc., conceptually motivated action arises. And from such action, the life cycle is itself constantly held together. So the operation of this ignorance, which was there at the very beginning, don't forget, in this obscuring sense, can be understood according to the analogy of a darkened room. Reality is veiled by this ignorance. The life cycle mentioned in the evolutionary sequence, briefly described, is none other than samsara operating according to the 12 links of interdependent origination in their afflicted order, starting with ignorance as the first link. So this evolution explains why, in terms of the current verse, I committed so much evil out of ignorance, lust, and hatred. For example, and speaking generally, notions of my body, my mind, my life, etc., can easily be extended outwards to include my friends, my house, my needs, my rights, my dogs, my money, etc. Thus, every time we cling to something as mine, we are actually reinforcing the manner in which we are clinging to our I as inherently existent. We're confirming it, apparently confirming it. This is why once conceived and labelled as mine, these things appear as mine by dint of their own natures. If they appeared as merely mine, there'd be no problem. Nominally mine, no problem. But this property notion, mine, has arisen in dependence on the escalating, exaggerating mechanism of inappropriate attention, and is therefore seen as an indispensable part of me. There's a fascinating side sort of to this topic here. I'll just quickly alert you to it. In Illumination of the Thought, Tsongkhapa discusses in a very, very detailed way how we should approach this notion of mind, because it's not quite mine as we normally think it. Tsongkhapa says, on the basis of having perceived the eyes and so on as mine, we tend to manifestly cling to a truly existent mine. It is not the case, however, that the eyes and so forth, which are instances of mine, are themselves the object of focus of mine. For this would bring the consequence that being an instance of identity view and a grasping at the self-existence of phenomena would not be mutually exclusive. As for the focal object of the innate grasping at the self-existence of all phenomena, this includes grasping at the aggregates and of form and so on, the ears and so on, of both self and others, as well as the external environment that is not part of our inner world. This is the crunch, it is mine itself, which is the focal object of the innate identity view grasping at mine. We should understand, says Lama Tsongkhapa, that the eyes we should not understand, says Tsongkhapa, that the eyes and so forth are its focal object. As for its apprehending aspect, it grasps at mind as existing through intrinsic characteristics on the basis of taking mind as its focus. And so Geoffrey Hopkins, in his account of this particular evolution of mind, if you like, refers to it as a making mind. So the mind that we grasp at is actually an aspect of ourself, which has been set up by identifying a mind and then holding on to the mind and while observing an object which has been made mind through a projection of conceptual thought. So I don't want to be, I mean, it is technical, but it's fascinating because it makes us work much harder to think about our relationship to attachment, because attachment works in a very particular way. If, for example, we see a vase being smashed while attending an auction, an antique auction, someone picks up a vase and drops it, we go, oh, broken vase. But if we've just bought that vase by bidding and have conceived it as mine, when we see that same vase being dropped, we experience severe pain as though we had been struck by some catastrophe. So the problem isn't the vase, is it? Can't be, because it would have to have occurred, the trauma would have had to have occurred equally in either case, but it doesn't. So it's the making mind that is the problem here. So this is why we have a perfect toxic cocktail for the generation of a whole host of afflictions, and incumbent on them, a whole host of negative karmic deeds, leaving seeds that will ripen as samsaric suffering. So it's the same with our I of this life. I'm referring specifically to Shantideva's lines, quote, "Therefore, through not having realized that I will suddenly vanish." Because we grasp at our I as existing in a false way, as inherently existent from its own side, independent of causes and conditions, we find it impossible to acknowledge how it might cease. This is all the more compounded because we've also superimposed permanence onto this falsely viewed I pertaining to this life, and therefore it appears inherently permanent. That's why we can't even begin to broach the possibility that our I of this life is a sheer nominal existence, and therefore will definitely perish, become vanished, as Shantideva so powerfully puts it. All up, this is a massive problem, as it exactly contradicts the mode in which I actually exist, as a merely labelled dependent arising, subject to causes and conditions, and thus by conventional nature impermanent, not able to be sustained for even an instant. We can and must extend this same evolutionary account to the generation of the three poisonous minds mentioned in Shantideva's verse in the lines, "I committed so much evil out of ignorance, lust, and hatred." For example, we're quick to generate anger or hate, which is a mental factor which also develops in stages. So I'll very quickly run through them. Hatred, for example, is a mental factor that observes with inappropriate attention an animate or inanimate object and feels it to be unattractive. It then exaggerates its bad qualities. That's the inappropriate attention. It's blowing them up. It's becoming badder and badder and badder. More and more and more bad qualities, more and more unattractive, more and more worthy of being hated. And the exaggeration continues until we consider that object there to be unpleasant to me from there. On that basis, we become antagonistic and we develop the wish to harm it. So that is the mind of anger. So we can really say, if we're being technical, that it's only at the end of that process that we can say we have generated the mind of anger. The mind of anger begins to generate in that scenario when we get that inkling of an aspect of the object as unpleasant, and then we seize on that portion of unpleasantness and then blow it up until it invades our entire apprehension of the object and then becomes its apparent nature. Exactly the same thing happens with desirous attachment, but in the other direction. Desirous attachment can apply to internal and external phenomena. It's also a mental factor that is said to develop in stages. We first behold and remember an object and feel it to be attractive. We focus awareness on its attractive qualities and proceed to exaggerate them. Again, inappropriate attention. Having inflated our idea of the object, we hold the object to be desirable and then actually develop desire for it. Eventually, our desire becomes attached to the object like glue. When all the stages are complete, we have generated desirous attachment. So again, you can see that whole process working with the vase. The moment I label it mine and apprehend it as mine, I have a very particular relationship which is going to be damaged when the vase is damaged. Therefore, until I realize not only that the exaggerated real I to which I cling is a dreamlike fabrication, so we haven't lost our way here, we're going back to dreams, and that the exaggerated things to which I cling, according to the operations of my three poisonous minds, are likewise hallucinatory fabrications, there is no prospect of quelling the operations of my three poisonous minds, nor oppose or circumvent in any effective way the chain of samsaric effects that follow. So the point I'm making, by understanding how we fallaciously cling to impermanent things as permanent, we are offered a precious stepping stone to realizing emptiness. How so? Because by discerning how we project permanence onto things that are not permanent, and thus cover them over with our blanketing hallucination, we gain a precious glimpse of the sheer blanketing force, the sheer capacity of our projective operations. This awareness, in turn, affords us a precious glimpse that perhaps, just perhaps, gives us a clue that the way things appear to us might not be the same as their actual mode of existence. There might even be a radical disjunction. This inkling of an awareness of a disjunction between appearance and reality is a suspicion that grows as we further delve into it. The chink in the armour of our deluded construction of a fallacious reality widens, as it were. That's why Shantideva famously says in his 400 stanzas, those with little merit Do not even doubt this teaching. Entertaining just a doubt tears to tatters worldly existence. It's a very, very famous verse for very good reason. Furthermore, by understanding that the I is empty and thus a dependent arising, we are able to determine that how the I is not annihilated at the time of death. And again, this resonates with Shantideva's verse. Because there is a suitable continuing basis of our designation, we can continue to label, in a general sense, I to that base. But it won't be the person of this life, because the person of this life has been predicated on the portion of consciousness and the associated body and so forth that have occurred at this time, merely designated to that. If I was really the I of this life only, there would be absolutely no possibility of my continuing after this life or of having existed prior to this life. Therefore, the whole structure of reincarnation, the whole possibility would collapse. The whole possibility of karma would collapse and so forth. The whole possibility of a spiritual path would collapse. The whole possibility of becoming liberated or enlightened would collapse. So all sorts of further consequences, to borrow the Prasangika term here, would follow, such as the karmic seeds deposited by my past life person could not be shared or occur to me in a future life. Because if my life of this moment existed inherently, it couldn't also be the same continuum as my future life. Couldn't be connected to anything, in fact, else. So in short, due to doubts, we're driven in a very good way to probe further. And it's in this way that we begin to move towards the actual remedy for the seeds of the afflictions and the seeds of karma, this being none other than a direct realization of emptiness. So such a realization is indispensable and constitutes now, for very obvious reasons, an amazingly efficient force of purification. So the next stanza, since nothing can be added to life and it runs out continuously, one is definite to die, and if one were to die with negativity, it is fearful. And the verse reads, remaining neither day nor night, life is always slipping by and never getting any longer. Why will death not come to one like me? Shantideva here is implicitly presenting the classical outlines of the meditation on death and impermanence that we find in the Lam Rim. For example, the 3 roots of the 9-part death meditation, which are, first, thinking about the inevitability of death. Secondly, thinking about the uncertainty of when we will die. And thirdly, thinking of how nothing can help you at the time of death except Dharma. So in this verse, Shantideva is again indicating the existential perils tied up in our bewildered conceit of permanence. Though our lives are always slipping away, we somehow manage to maintain the spurious belief that we can avoid death, that death will not come to one like me. It's amazing. It comes to everyone else, but not this one. This is sheer vanity, and the dangers it incurs are very real, because due to such vanity, we forestall, endlessly postpone the critical task of purifying our ill deeds. Okay, we'll do that later. Not today. I'm too busy. No, not this hour. Not now, but sometime. For sure. I'm full of regrets and know something is to be done. Don't worry. I'm onto this. Anyhow, it's lunchtime now, and there's fun to be had. So come over for a drinks party tonight. We'll have a whale of a time. It's in this careless, frivolous way that we tumble into the lower realms because our practice has been just a conceptual game. Moreover, we haven't even stopped, even paused to consider the fact that we have created a veritable multitudinous heap of negativities, let alone get around to viewing them through the painful lens of intense regret. And the fact remains, our karmic imprints are left sitting on our mind streams fearsomely intact and will definitely ripen. So Kelsubje points us to this pending danger. He begs us to consider the way negativity is frightful. He says, if one does not purify it, it is definite we will be overwhelmed by suffering later. But we don't think of later, do we? We continue to shrug off consequences like a dog shaking off water. That's precisely Shantideva's resounding warning. But our denial is very deep. We can't even bear to face the rhetorically posed question in the verse's last line, which is, why will death not come to one like me? I know this from my own experience. I'm talking about death and impermanence meditations, that sometimes one is almost attacked by people who say, why are you being so morbid? Why do you have to bring this up? Why don't you just relax and enjoy? Stop getting so uptight. So you can see here, there's a real problem. Next heading is, if one does not purify one's negativities, then one's friends and relatives cannot rescue us from the suffering of the life force being cut. So verse 40, while I'm lying in bed, although surrounded by my relatives and friends, the feeling of life being severed will be experienced by me alone. And 41, AB, the first two lines, while I am held by the minions of the Lord of Death, what benefit are friends? What benefit are relatives? So the reality of our predicament has really come home to roost. The appalling fact emerges. If it hasn't already, we're absolutely on our own. Sentimental notions of safety, ensconced in our affectionate sense that we are okay when surrounded by friends and relatives, is about to be torn apart. The very idea of a deathbed already does that. In this way, the conceit of security that we have woven around ourselves as an all-embracing mesh is about to be revealed, to be full of holes. How different is this traumatic scenography to that of a Tathagata? In the training compendium, Shantideva quotes from the Cloud of Jewel Sutra, referring to a Tathagata. While lying in bed, they lie on their right sides, with one foot atop of the other, with their bodies properly covered by their monastic robes, mindful and aware, knowing when to get up and when it will be light. They should not be attached to the pleasure of lying down or the pleasure of sleep, but should seek only to rest and refresh the physical body. By lying in this orientation, they should not break the continuity of practice and should joyfully promote the welfare of sentient beings. End of quote. So, of course, this posture is also the one adopted when a Tathagata is about to manifest passing into parinirvana. At no point in their transition do they stop working for the welfare of sentient beings. This is the exact opposite, isn't it, of someone crying out in fear and distress as they recognize that their body is failing and they're about to die. Tsongkhapa quotes from the Garland of Birth Stories again. Though you hold fast, you cannot stay. What benefit is there in being frightened and scared of what cannot be changed? Thus, when you analyze the nature of the world, humans are regretful at death because they have sinned and have not brought forth virtuous actions. They worry about suffering to come in future lives, and the fear of dying clouds their minds. So in the third section of the classical 9-point death meditation, this inability to take our friends with us is presented under the heading, the contemplation that at the time of death, nothing helps except religious practice, which has 3 divisions. Very tellingly, friends will not help, resources will not help, your body will not help. Therefore, it's absolutely fitting that I now turn my mind to Dharma. As Tsongkhapa advises, no matter where the teachings on reliance on a teacher, leisure, and opportunity and impermanence may occur in the Buddha's word and its commentaries, recognize that they are meant to be practiced and sustain them in meditation. If you do so, you will easily find the intent of the conqueror. Understand that you must proceed in this way in the context of the other teachings as well. And he quotes again from the Garland of Birth Stories. However, I do not know of anything I have done that would make me regretful. And I've made myself accustomed to virtuous action. Why should anyone who abides in the teaching fear death? Of course, the reasons for the lack of regret in this immediate regard on our own part is due to having, the reason why that person is not afraid of death is due already to having purified their negative karmas before it was too late. The next heading, it is fearful because of not having created merit. And they're the last 2 lines of verse 41. My merit alone shall protect me then, but upon that I have never relied. God Sabje indicates that the real peril of this death moment resides in our lack of merit, and the grim fact, despite our protestations, it is simply too late to accumulate it. Nor can our friends hand it over to us as they might confer a chocolate to our parched lips and already gaping mouth. You'll recall the sutra quote that not even a Buddha can confer realizations with his hands. Gyaltsen Sabje's commentary on these lines reads, at that time, only merits such as refuge, keeping morality and so forth are the supreme refuge, but I also did not rely on them. This shows regret because of not having practiced virtue. Geshe Doga likewise says, our whole practice is subsumed in the heading, it is fearful because of not having created merit. That is the crux of our practice. So I try in my daily life to spend time considering these points. It would also be good for all of you to really pay some attention to them and take them to heart. So you can really appreciate here how all the great masters are saying the same thing. Geshe Doga pursues the point by bringing it alarmingly home. Since we all bear the name of Dharma practitioners, it is not out of place for us to attempt to practice the Dharma in the most appropriate way, which means developing regret for negativities and rejoicing in our virtues and so forth. I don't blame those, says Geshe-Doga, who try to fill what otherwise seems to be an uncomfortable and lonely life by trying to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend who may seemingly fill that void and provide some sort of pleasant experiences. However, when we think about it, really think about it, there is really no ultimate benefit in spending time and energy on that. Ouch. One will become overcome by regret. 42. O protectors, I, so unconcerned, unaware of such terrors as this, accumulated a great deal of evil for the sake of this transient life. So now regret comes, but perhaps this is still not yet qualified as a healthily productive regret, alas. So is this a reference to the power of regret that we employ in the four purificatory powers? Or is it merely a reactive kind? We are forced into regret by default, not by realization, because we have remained for so long unaware of the real terrors ahead of us. If this regret is indeed a miserable, even pathetic kind of reactive regret, because it is now evident our time for accumulating merit has been squandered, maybe it is not to be distinguished from some variety of maudlin self-pity. Sure, we acknowledge finally that we're in crisis, but the death process is now so advanced that we can do nothing to redress past wrongs. So Shantideva's verse is really a cry of pain issuing from our dying throat at this dreadfully hopeless time. This is what I meant by Shantideva's ventriloquizing in a dialogue. He's actually ventriloquizing what we'd be thinking as we enter into the death process, not having regretted our faults and no longer having any time to do anything about it. Geshe-Doga's reading, following that of Gyaltsabje, is much more forgiving than the sort of doubts that I've raised. He first quotes Gyaltsabje, referring to the object of refuge as protector. One proclaims, I, this reckless person, did not search out these dangers of the lower realms, and I did not know about them, but I generated much negativity in this impermanent life for the purpose of this life, such as friends and so forth. This I regret. And Geshe-Doga elaborates. As the commentary indicates, the objects of refuge, such as the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas, are protectors who are endowed with loving kindness. In proclaiming them as protectors, the commentary is indicating that one must rely on them. Thus, one proclaims in front of these objects of refuge who are endowed with great love and compassion, I, this reckless person, did not search out these dangers of the lower realms. Here, reckless comes from the Tibetan word bakmi, which is the opposite of bakyo, which means conscientiousness. Thus, reckless refers to a lack of conscientiousness. So, following this line of interpretation, this I in crisis is to be given some leeway. First, because irrespective of whether or not we have practiced, the protectors are endowed with great love and compassion and therefore won't spurn us, refuse to help us at any time or in any way. Secondly, we have indeed been reckless, which means we haven't been able to close the door to the transgressions due to a lack of conscientiousness. This means we haven't got around to, for whatever reasons, searching out these dangers or fears of the lower realms. Perhaps this is so because we haven't made contact with the teachings of the omniscient Buddha. Anyhow, now the contact has been made, and regret for non-virtuous deeds, as well as the wish to be conscientious, has now been generated, albeit on the very veritable cusp of us toppling into the lower realms. Better late than never. So you'll recall the 4 doors of transgression were identified some weeks ago. I'll be very quick here. The door of ignorance. This is not understanding the vows and commitments. And the remedy, preventing any downfall through this door, is identifying all the vows and commitments. The second door of transgression, to transgression, door of lacking faith. This is lacking faith in the spiritual master and the spiritual friend. The remedy for this is cultivating the faith in one's spiritual master and one's spiritual friends. Even if we have fully understood the vows and commitments that are to be kept, but lack faith in the spiritual masters, we become very absent-minded towards keeping our vows and commitments. The third is a lack of conscientiousness or alertness, and this is the one that Shantideva is specifically referring to in his verse. That is to say, even if you have identified the vows and have faith in the spiritual master, but from your own side lack mindfulness and conscientiousness, it will prove impossible to keep, to prevent any transgressions of the vows and so forth from arising. So the remedy here is to cultivate conscientiousness or alertness so that transgressions may be averted. And the fourth, the door of too many afflicted minds. Unless you do something to suppress the afflicted minds which so strongly dominate our mental continuum, even if you do have understanding and faith in the teaching and the teacher, due to these mental afflictions, it will prove difficult to perform the practice. So the remedy here is to apply a remedy to the profusion of afflicted minds. So Shantideva's reference, as I've made clear, is to the third door, lacking conscientiousness or alertness. Panlung Rinpoche says, as an antidote to being non-conscientious, in whatever activity of the 3 doors to be mindful without forgetfulness of that which is to be adopted and that which is to be discarded, and by strongly relying upon continual introspection, due to possessing shame and embarrassment, with the conscientiousness that shuns downfalls, one should know unmistakably. And the meaning is also made clear elsewhere in Shantideva's guide. For example, in chapter 5, verse 1, Shantideva writes, those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds, for those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice. And in verse 20 of the same chapter, and if I am careful of a wound through fear of it being slightly hurt, then why do I not guard the wound of my mind through fear of being crushed by the mountains of hell? Alan Wallace translates this door of conscientiousness as the door of carelessness. I think this is helpful, but does carelessness act as a reasonable excuse or a mitigating circumstance in our current context of Shantideva's verse 42, I wonder? Again, Geshe Doga gives us the benefit of the doubt and urges us to get on with it. The essential point of this verse is that by reflecting upon the various negativities one has accumulated in this very lifetime, one develops strong regret along with the intention to purify these negativities. Such, of course, is the irrepressible compassion of the refuge objects. The reason why it is so fearful, verse 43, petrified is the person today being led to a torture chamber with dry mouth and dreadful sunken eyes. His entire mouth is transfigured, appearance is transfigured. What need to mention the tremendous despair when stricken with the disease of great panic, being clasped by the physical forms of the frightful messengers of death? Gyaltsabje's commentary on these two verses pursues the same grim hyperrealism employed by Shantideva as a means of waking us up. He says, a person who is being led today by other humans to the ground where his limbs will be chopped off will be frightened. His mouth will be dry. His complexion will be pale. His eyes will burn and so forth. As such, his appearance will be quite different to before. If that is so, then what need is there to mention the fear of the extremely pitiful person whose flesh is being held by the fearful minions of the Lord of Death? Such a person will have great fear, hence generate negativity, generate regret for negativity. So I think this really does capture the measure by which we're to estimate the quality, or rather the sheer intensity of our regret. It should be this acute. It should be viscerally apparent to the very depths of our being, just as the body of a condemned man is stricken with spasms of fear. So we're to understand that the analogy intended here is perhaps more than an analogy if we consider it in experiential terms. The sheer galvanizing terror of being aware of the implication of our negative karma, why it's so fearful, should be similar. Geshe-Doga renders the analogy more palpable. People are taken to the places of punishment by other humans who have the same nature and body and so forth. If being led to the place of punishment by other humans generates great fear, then what need is there to mention the fear of the extremely pitiful person whose flesh is being held by the fearful minions of the Lord of Death? The basis of this horrific fear of those now clutched by death is such that we experience, says Geshe-Doga, extreme and fearful visions. Many of us will know this through the famous presentation in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. We also have reference to this in Shantideva's dedication chapter, for example, verse 11. Why are the henchmen of Yama, the unbearable buzzards and vultures afraid, through whose noble strength is joy brought upon us and darkness dispelled? Looking up, they behold in the firmament the radiant form of Vajrapani. Through the force of their joy may they be free from evil and find his company. So this verse is taking place from hell, looking up at a source of refuge in the form of Vajrapani coming to rescue them. So returning to the deathbed scene, Geshe-Doga says, when such a person has these visions of fearful beings leading them away from their life source, it definitely gives rise to great fear. I've heard that when those who have engaged in warfare and the like, and have taken the lives of others, such as generals and so forth, approach the last stages of their lives, they have visions of weapons coming towards them or others coming to kill them with weapons and so forth. It seems that what they engaged in during their life comes back to them in the form of these fearsome visions. In this way, it is very real and brings tremendous fear. Geshe-Doga continues, the point in relating all of this is that one needs to generate regret for one's negativity with the intent of wanting to purify it. We might add, Shantideva is sparing us nothing in his bid to get us to do this. If we have already come around to this realization and performed purification in the past, this wouldn't be necessary. But the dreadful fact that it is, it is necessary. We are the living evidence. So I might stop here. There's so much more to be said. You can see here how relentless, and I use that word in a positive way, is the logic, the methodological kind of expositional logic of Shantideva's sequence of verses. He's driving home the point from this and every angle so that we have no false basis to cling to anymore, no deluded basis left. We have to open ourselves up to embracing the need to purify and purify now. So I'll do the dedication prayers on behalf of everyone. From Shantideva's dedication. For as long as space endures, for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings have happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honoured and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, Bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase for evermore. May my Venerable Lama's life be long, firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honouring the 3 jewels, savour of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. And to Tenzin Oso Hitta. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far-off distant land, we make this request, O Lama, please live long. And to Geshe Losang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. And for Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher, leading your students towards wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, you are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Chomden de Shingche Padra Chompa Yang Dapa Sope Sange Nampa Nangze Oki Gelpo La Chag Selo Jangchud Sempa Chempo Kuntu Zangpo La Chag Selo Tayata Penchagriya Ava Badani Swaha Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha Tayata Penchagriya Ava Badani Swaha Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha Tayata Penchagriya Ava Badani Swaha Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again.